In the heart of an ancient city, where cobblestone streets wound like serpents through shadows cast by centuries-old buildings, a hidden society thrived. Known only to a few, the Crimson Circle had guarded arcane secrets for generations, performing rituals under the cover of night. Tonight, a novice was about to learn the true cost of their hidden knowledge. Ava had always felt like an outsider, her nights plagued by dreams of cryptic symbols and whispered voices. One evening, a letter arrived, its seal marked with a blood-red circle. The letter invited her to a gathering at the old library, a place she had always found eerily fascinating. As Ava stepped inside, she was greeted by the scent of aged paper and candle wax. Hooded figures moved silently among the bookshelves, their faces hidden. A man with piercing blue eyes approached her. "Welcome, Ava. We've been expecting you," he said, his voice smooth and hypnotic. "I am Elias, the leader of the Crimson Circle." The room was lit by flickering candles, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the center, a large, intricately designed pentagram was drawn on the floor, surrounded by ancient runes. Elias guided Ava to the center of the circle. "Tonight, you will witness our power," Elias intoned, his eyes never leaving hers. "But remember, true knowledge comes at a price." As the chanting began, Ava felt a chill run down her spine. The air grew thick with an otherworldly presence. Suddenly, the symbols around her started to glow, and she felt an invisible force pulling at her mind. Visions of strange worlds and monstrous beings flooded her consciousness. When the ritual ended, Ava collapsed, her mind reeling from the influx of knowledge. Elias helped her to her feet, his expression unreadable. "You've seen the truth, Ava. Our world is but a veil over a much darker reality," he said softly. "The Crimson Circle exists to protect that secret and to harness its power." Ava's dreams became more vivid, the symbols now making sense. She realized the Crimson Circle was not just a society, it was a battleground against malevolent forces. Elias's words haunted her. Knowledge comes at a price. Ava was given a choice, to leave and forget everything or to join them, embracing the burden of their secret. The weight of her decision was immense. The temptation of power and understanding was overwhelming, but the fear of what lay beyond was paralyzing. In the end, Ava chose to stay. The Crimson Circle welcomed her as one of their own, and she vowed to protect humanity from the shadows she now knew existed. But deep within, she wondered if she had made the right choice, as the line between protector and prisoner blurred with each passing night. Years later, Ava stood where she had first met Elias, now wearing the hood of a full member. The city's lights flickered, and she sensed a new presence. A young man, eyes wide with curiosity, stepped through the library's doors, a crimson-sealed letter in hand. "Welcome," Ava said, her voice echoing Elias's words. "We've been expecting you." The cycle continued, as the Crimson Circle guarded the thin barrier between the known and the unknown, its members forever haunted by the price of their knowledge. I have a routine that I do every day. I wake up, do my chores, go for a walk, and come home. But about a month ago, whenever I go out of the corner of my eye, I see what appears to be a person behind me. But when I turn around, there's nothing. And this has been happening both on the street and at home, and lately it's been getting worse. 3 days ago, I woke up at dawn to go drink water, and at the end of the corridor that leads to the stairs, I saw a silhouette. It was tall and all black, and it seemed to stare into the depths of my soul. The lights started to go on and off madly, and several laughs began to echo from every possible corner until everything simply stopped. The house, once again, was dark, and I could hear a glass falling and breaking down in the kitchen. I just went down, trying to stay calm. It was totally dark, and I stepped on something sharp. It was one of the several pieces of the glass scattered across the floor, and further on, my cell phone. But he was with me. I took it as quickly as possible and turned on the flashlight at the bathroom door on the other side of the kitchen, a person running and entering the bathroom. He was running in a strange way. I ran to my room as quickly as possible and locked myself, sitting on the bed with the light on, desperately trying to call several family numbers, and in the end, I called the police. They asked what was happening. I just replied, "There's someone at my house." The voice on the other side told me to remain calm, that there were already police officers coming to my address. Until that about 3 minutes after starting the call, the lights go out. I get up quickly and go to the switch, but it doesn't come on, and I receive a photo on my cell phone. It was a photo of me, standing in front of the switch, looking at my cell phone. The lights came back out of nowhere. I turned around, and nothing. There was no one, and where were the police who were supposed to have arrived? I ran out of my room and locked myself in a bathroom, which could hardly fit more than one person in there, and a noise began, very far away and low, of something dragging on the floor. But each time it was getting louder, that is, it was coming towards me. Until the noise stopped, I was calming down when the sound of the front door slamming with unimaginable force and causing it to break, it made me scream, and again the noise stopped. This time he didn't come back. I slowly unlocked the bathroom door and opened it. The front door, which led to the basement, was completely shattered. I tiptoed down, trying to do as little as possible noise. Everything was dark, and I went to the middle of the basement until I received a photo on my cell phone. It was a face, totally pale, with blood running from his eyes, and a smile with huge teeth. I turned around very quickly, with the flashlight on, but there was nothing, absolutely nothing. I ran upstairs again and went to the living room, where candles formed a circle on the coffee table, which went out instantly after I entered the room. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out into the street, but when I came out, there was no light. Everything was dark. There was no light from streetlights, houses, or stars. It was like being on a film set, and there wasn't a single noise. You couldn't see anything, nothing at all. Until I receive another photo of the same face, pale, with bloody eyes and a strange smile. But who was behind him? It was me, looking at the photo he himself had sent. There was a hunter in the woods, who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around the inside of the cabin, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by several portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred and malice. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the hunter awoke. He turned, blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. It's scaring me. Every night it snows here. The wind always stirs the snow in ways that it looks human. Faces, guns, knives. Sometimes it even turns red. I seem to be the only one that can see this. Even typing this, I can see my mother's eyes staring at me through the snow. Through the window, the lonely street lamp casts the light on the snow in a way that it glows with evil. The curtains do little against the glow. My apartment isn't high up, only on the second floor, but I still see it all clearly. Tonight the snowfall looks like little drops of blood. It looks absolutely horrifying, all the different shades of red painting against the pale blues and greys of the other buildings. Even the sky is dark red with clouds that seem too heavy. The sound is even worse. Every drop sounds like an uncooked steak falling against a marble surface. The flimsy curtains do little to drown out the sounds of blood splattering against the cracks of an unkempt sidewalk. I'm about to go to bed when I see it. A person. A young man who looks to be the same age as me. He's walking down the sidewalk, coat wet with blood. Suddenly he trips on something and falls head first into a puddle. In an instant I'm by his side, checking for a pulse. Nothing. I'm patting my pocket searching for my phone when the boy is holding me by the collar. His face is covered in blood and his left eye is bruised. Next to his eye I can see a deep wound with something spilling out. His skull looks deformed and blood is spilling out his mouth and dripping down his chest. Then I recognize him. It's my own brother. I try to speak to him, to say his name, but nothing comes out. He hits me in the eye, hard. He then rasps out in a pained voice, "Help me, Miles." Then I wake up. It was a dream. The snow is still falling as red as ever. Then my right eye starts hurting. Bad. I walk to the small bathroom and take a look at the mirror. A bruise on my left eye, almost identical to the one my brother had. Was it a dream if I have a bruise now on my face? Then my phone starts ringing in the other room. I pick it up. It's my mother. The last time she called was when Dad died from a heart attack. "Miles, it's Mummy. Trevor was killed in a street fight." Unable to say anything, I hang up. How? How was any of this possible? I sit on the bed in silence for a long time. The sun starts to rise from the horizon. The snow slowly fades out of existence. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek and usually only takes me about 25-30 minutes. I've made this trip dozens of times and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There is always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I tried to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day, I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure of what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation. I whispered, "Hello?" hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips. I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back in the sound of my voice. "Hello?" I started to breathe too fast. My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I might faint. "Hello?" My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream, I couldn't reply, as my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. "Hello? Hello? Hello?" it repeated. "Stop it." I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there were no typical forest sounds. There were no bugs, no frogs or crickets. Nothing. I stood there, terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. "Stop it!" it mimicked back. I'd had enough and was willing my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched in horror as a deer head with huge antlers protruded through the brush. As it came further out and stood up on twos, I took off. I flew out of those woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mum when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down and thought about what happened. My mother came in at some point and asked me if everything was all right. I replied that yes, I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I might have been afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. This terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more, and that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds quieted. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers up over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. "Hello?" I cried. It was all I could do. "Hello? Stop it!" It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said, but then it did something new. It called my name. "Amy." My mother's voice. "Amy, Amy, come here." "Hello, stop it." My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature they called Yi Naldlushi, he who goes on all fours, or a skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil witch that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required, and that it had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, that I would always have to be careful. Last night I heard scratching on my window, then a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said, in my mother's voice. At one point it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far like, me. It tried to get me to come outside, or to open the door and let it in my house. This went on all night. At this point I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is it seriously going stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can take that. It started with a whisper faintly appearing on the wind. Psst. Larineth glanced around the field she was in, and after not seeing anyone, she went back to her task, picking the most beautiful flowers she could find and laying them in a basket. Today was her birthday, and she had proudly told anyone that she met that she was turning 9 years old today, and soon she would be an adult just like them. Psst. She looked up, feeling goosebumps appear on her skin as she glanced around again. still not seeing anybody. She looked down at the daisy she had just picked and recoiled in horror, throwing it with a scream. Her eyes watched as the daisy, that was now a black, rotting thing, sailed through the air, disappearing amongst the many flowers in the field. She stared at the spot it had disappeared, breathing heavily at the shock. It was louder this time, making her whirl around in search of the intruder. "Who's there?" she yelled. No answer. "This isn't funny." Again, no answer. She felt a chill creep into her spine as she looked around the field, every which way. There was a rustling, which her head snapped towards, before realizing the wind was making all the plants sway lazily. She shivered, despite the sunlight beaming down on her. She quickly started heading towards her village, basket in hand. She hurried, bursting into the front door of her home. "Mama, I got some!" she called out. No answer. "Mama?" Again, no answer. She slowly crept through the house, searching for any sign of her mother. She heard the floor creak and whipped around to face the noise, not seeing anything. She crept towards the back room, the room that belonged to her mother. As she got nearer, it came back. Psst! Nervously looking around, Larineth still couldn't see anyone. The house suddenly got dark, all light seeming to disappear into shadow. Who's there? What do you want with me?" she managed to stutter out. There was no answer. She took another step towards her mother's room before the sound came again. Psst! Glancing around fearfully, she darted forward into her mother's room, only to see a figure standing over the still form of her mother. The figure was wrapped in a black robe and seemed to be staring at her. Larineth gulped as she looked towards where the face would be, only to see nothing but shadow. Soon, the figure slowly faded out of view, seeming to dissolve into thin air. Larineth rubbed her eyes to make sure she wasn't seeing things before running over to her mother. "Mama?" No answer. She wasn't moving. Larineth bolted, running outside and searching for the nearest person she could find. As she glanced around, an uneasy feeling appeared in the pit of her stomach. Her village seemed empty. She ran to the nearest house, pounding on the door and screaming for help. The door slowly creaked inwards, but there was nobody there. She cautiously walked in, exploring, and found the people. On the floor, unmoving. Larineth screamed and ran, but the next house was the same. Everyone was silent, lifeless. She ran from house to house, tears streaming down her face as she screamed and yelled for someone, anyone, to help her. There was no answer to her cries. She went through the entire village, only to find that she was the last one alive. As she looked around in her hysteria, she noticed the robed figure from her house earlier. The cloth moved as if the figure was pointing at her, but there was no visible limb, only shadow. "Soon," the voice echoed around her. She dropped to her knees, sobbing before letting out the loudest scream she possibly could. She screamed as she sat up in her bed, sweating profusely and glancing around. "It was just a dream," she muttered to herself. "Larineth, come eat. Breakfast is ready." She heard her mother yell from the kitchen. It was just a dream. She reassured herself before going to the kitchen. After eating and getting dressed for the day, her mother handed her a basket. "Why don't you go pick some flowers, sweetie? The ones on the table are looking sad." Larineth glanced behind her at the vase on the table. The flowers were indeed starting to wilt. She turned back and smiled. "Okay, Mama, I'll get the prettiest flowers ever." She took off, racing to the field, beginning to pick the flowers that stood out and caught her attention. Psst! It started with a whisper, faintly appearing on the wind. so I've been hearing this creepy bird-like whistle since I was 18. For context, we live at the countryside, and there's a sugarcane field at the back our house, and behind the field was the woods. The field was wide, so it was a bit far from our house. I don't know when exactly I started hearing it, but as I remember, I've started to hear it at the age of 18. I'm 20 now, so it's been 2 years. At first, I pay it no mind, but I noticed that I've been hearing it near my apartment I'm staying at for college. I moved apartments, so it was my second apartment, and it was also near the woods. It was located at the end of the street, and one time, I went out alone to buy some snacks because I was pulling an all-nighter for my project, and that's when I heard the weird whistle again. I don't want to overthink too much before, and I told myself that it might just be a bird, but when I heard it that night, it creeped me out. I think I heard it last February this year, and I'm still hearing it every time I go home to the countryside. Should I be concerned, or am I just being paranoid? It was a nice summer day. My 5-year-old son James was playing outside in the backyard of our suburban home. James has always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends, but he has always had a wild imagination. I was in the kitchen feeding our dog Fido when I heard what sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. I'm not sure who it was he could be talking to. Could he have finally made a friend? Being a single mum, it's hard for me to always keep an eye on my son, so I decided to go outside and check on him. When I went into the backyard, I was a bit confused because James was the only person back there. Was he talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard another voice. "James, it's time to come inside." I called out to him. He came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. It was about lunchtime, so I decided to make him a turkey sandwich. "James, who were you talking to out there?" I asked. James looked up for a moment. "I was playing with my new friend," he said, smiling. I poured him some milk and continued to pry, as any good mother would. "Does your friend have a name? Why didn't you ask him to have lunch with us?" I asked. James stared at me for a moment before replying, "His name is Laughing Jack." I was a bit taken back by what he had said. "Oh, that's a strange name. What does your friend look like?" I asked, a bit confused. "He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks, and he always smiles." I realized my son was talking about an imaginary friend. I suppose it is normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real kids to play with. It's probably just a phase. The rest of the day went by as per usual, and it was starting to get late, so I put James to bed. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and made sure to turn on his nightlight before I closed the door. I was pretty tired myself, so I decided to go to bed not long after. I had an awful nightmare. It was dark. I was in some kind of run-down amusement park. I was scared, running through an endless field of empty tents, broken-down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had a horrible look to it. Everything was black and white. The prize stuffed animals all hung from nooses in the game huts, all with sick grins stitched on their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at me, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Then suddenly, I began to hear music play. The sounds of Pop Goes the Weasel being played on a squeeze box echoed through the park. It was hypnotizing. I followed its tune to the circus tent almost in a trance, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single spotlight shining on the center of the big top. As I walked toward the light, the music slowed down. I found myself singing along, unable to stop. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey, though, 'twas all in fun. The music stopped right before its climax, and suddenly the lights shot on. The intensity of the lights was practically blinding. All I could see was a small, dark silhouette shuffle towards me. Then another one appeared, and another, and another. There were dozens of them, all coming toward me. I couldn't move, my legs were frozen. All I could do was watch as the haunting figures drew nearer. As they got closer, I could see. They were children. As I looked at each one, I noticed they were all horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body, others were severely burnt, and others were missing limbs, even eyes. The children enveloped me, clawing at my flesh, dragging me to the ground and tearing inside me. As the children tore me apart and I faded away, all I could hear was laughter, horrible, awful, evil laughter. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. After taking a few deep breaths, I looked over and saw that a few of James's action figures were positioned facing me on top of my nightstand. I sighed. James had probably woken up early and put these here. I gathered up the toys and made my way to James's room. However, when I opened the door, James was sound asleep. I just shrugged and placed the toys back into his toy box and headed out to the living room. A little while later, James woke up and I made him his breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a bit groggy. Perhaps he didn't sleep well either. I decided to ask him about the toys. "James, honey, did you put the toys in Mommy's room this morning?" His eyes shot up at me for a moment, then quickly glanced back down at his cereal. "Laughing Jack did it." I rolled my eyes and responded, "Well, you tell Laughing Jack to keep the toys in your room." James nodded and finished up his breakfast, then decided to go play out in the backyard. I went to relax in the living room, and I must have dozed off because I woke up a couple hours later. Shit, I need to check on James. I was a bit worried. It had been over 2 hours, and I haven't checked on him. I stepped out into the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. I was getting nervous, so I called out to him, "James! James, where are you?" Just then, I heard a giggle come from the front yard. I rushed through the gate around to the front of the house. James was sitting on the sidewalk. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked over to him. "James, how many times have I told you to stay in the backyard? James, what are you eating?" James looked up at me, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a hand full of hard candies in all colors. This made me very nervous. "James, who gave you that candy?" James just stared at me, not speaking. "James, please tell Mommy where you got that candy." James hung his head down and said, "Laughing Jack gave it to me." My heart sunk. I kneeled down to look him in the eye. "James, I've had enough of this damn Laughing Jack thing. He is not real. Now this is a very serious situation, and I need to know who gave you the candy." I could see my son's eyes tear up. "But Mama, Laughing Jack did give me the candy." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James has never lied to me, but what he's telling me is impossible. I make him spit out the candy and I throw the rest away. James appears to be fine. Maybe I'm just overreacting. After all, he could have gotten it from Tom and Linda from next door, or Mr. Walker down the street. Either way, I'm going to have to keep a closer eye on James. That night, I put James to bed as usual and decided to go to bed early myself. Suddenly, I was woken up by a loud bang coming from the kitchen. I sprung out of bed and hurried down the stairs. When I got to the kitchen, I was horrified. Everything on the counters had been thrown on the floor, and our dog Fido hung dead from the light fixture. His stomach was cut open and stuffed with candy, the same type that James was eating earlier that day. My shock was quickly broken by a sharp scream coming from James's room, followed by loud crashes. I quickly grabbed a knife from the drawer and moved up the stairs with the speed that only a mother whose child is in danger could have. I burst through the door and flicked on the lights. Everything in the room was knocked over and tossed on the floor. My poor son in his bed crying and shaking with fear, a pool of urine staining the sheets. I scooped my child up and ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily, they were still awake. They let me use their phone and I called the police. It didn't take them long to arrive, and I explained what had happened. They looked at me as if I were crazy. They searched the house, but all they found was a dead dog and 2 trashed rooms. The officer told me that someone had probably gotten into the house and done this right before making a quick escape when they heard me coming up the stairs. I knew it wasn't true. All the doors were locked and none of the windows were open. Whatever was in my house didn't come from outside. The next day, James stayed inside. I didn't want him to leave my sight. I went into the garage and found his old baby monitor and set it up in his room. If anything comes into his room tonight, I was going to be able to hear it. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the drawer and put it on my nightstand. Imaginary friend or not, I'm not letting anything hurt my little boy. Soon enough, night came. I put James to bed. He was afraid, but I promised him that I wasn't going to let anything happen to him. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and turned on the nightlight. Before closing the door, I whispered to him, "Good night, James. I love you." I tried to stay up as long as I could, but after a few hours I felt myself drifting off. My baby would be safe for the night and I needed to sleep. Just as I lay my head on the pillow, I heard a soft noise come from the baby monitor I had put on my nightstand. At first it sounded like interference, like the kind a radio would make. Then it turned into a soft moan. Was James asleep? Then I heard it, the laugh from my nightmare, that horrible laugh. I sprung up from bed and grabbed the knife from under my pillow. I rushed over to James's room and creaked the door open. I tried the light switch, but it wouldn't come on. I took a step in, and I could feel the warm, thick liquid on my feet. Suddenly, James's nightlight came on, and I could see the absolute horror laid out in front of me. James's body was nailed up on the wall, the nails piercing through his hands and feet. His chest was cut wide open, and his organs hung down to the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed along with most of his teeth. I was disgusted. I could hardly believe this was my baby boy. Then I heard it again, the soft, desperate moan. James was still alive. My baby, my poor baby, in so much pain, barely clinging to life. I ran across the room and vomited on the floor, but my sickness was interrupted by a horrible cackle coming from behind me. I spun around while still wiping bile from my mouth. Then out of the shadows emerged the fiend responsible for all this horror, Laughing Jack. His ghost-white skin and matted black hair hung down to his shoulders. He had piercing white eyes surrounded by dark black rings. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp, jagged teeth, and his skin didn't look like skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He wore a patchy black and white clown outfit with striped sleeves and socks. His body itself was grotesque, his long arms hanging down past his waist, and the way he was poised made him look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He let out a sickening laugh, as if to let me know he was pleased with my reaction to his work. He then turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh even more at the horrific sight he has laid out. That was enough to shake me from my terror. I snapped, "Get away from him, you bastard!" I rushed at the monster, raising the knife above my head, and stabbed down at him. But as soon as the knife touched him, he disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. The knife passed right through and pierced James's still beating heart, splashing the warm blood on my face. No. What have I done? My baby. I killed my baby. I immediately fell to my knees, and I could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. My boy, My sweet baby boy. I promised Mommy would protect you. But I failed. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. Police soon arrived to find me in front of my son, still wielding the knife covered in my baby's blood. The trial was short, insanity. I was placed in the Phyropolis house for the criminally insane, where I have been for the past 2 months. It's not so bad here. The only reason I'm awake now is because someone is playing Pop, Goes the Weasel outside my window. I'll talk to the orderlies about it in the morning.